Good afternoon, everyone. This is Elizabeth Tai from MPA, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. Thank you for joining us on this summer Tuesday. MPA, as you know, is the voice and advocate for the magazine media industry, and this is an example of one of the things that we feel is super important for our members, and that's to draw in some of the best work being done outside of magazine media. So I welcome you to today's webinar, Building Sustainable Membership Programs, and I'm happy to be co-hosting with Emily Golosky, who is the Research Director at the Membership Puzzle Project at NYU. NYU and their partners have done tremendous work looking at consumers and what makes them excited and engaged with their media partners. We're delighted to have Emily with us today to hear about the good work she and her colleagues have been doing, and I'm going to turn it over to her in a moment. A little bit of housekeeping before we do. We invite you to use the chat box to ask questions throughout, and Emily will be taking questions. I think depending on the question and on her flow, she'll either take it as you provide it or as a roll-up at the end. Also, we have everyone on mute. This will give a higher caliber of quality control to our webinar today, and we thank you in advance for your cooperation. The webinar will be housed, the audio from this webinar will be housed on the MPA website, magazine.org, within a couple of days. And we invite you to go back to it and to send colleagues back to it, because this is the type of information that, while fascinating in real time, is also going to be no doubt ever more valuable as your brand pursues its membership initiatives. So without any further ado, I again thank you for joining us today, and I'd like to turn the microphone over to Emily Golosky, Research Director of the Membership Puzzle Project at NYU. Thank you, Emily, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm gonna, if you'll forgive me for 1 second, I just am going to make sure that we're all lines are muted. Just one moment here. And then we're going to get right underway.
And Emily, I think the view is now back to the view with your...
Here we go. I think, Beth, now hopefully you all will not have to suffer through seeing my notes and should be good to go. So thank you so much for having me. I am speaking to you today from New York University Journalism School, where the Membership Puzzle Project is based. And we are, you can think of us almost as a pop-up research project jointly funded by the Knight Foundation and Democracy Fund to look at ways that journalism can optimize for trust. And so we study in the course of that work and looking at trust indicators, audience revenue generation, and audience development, we look at sites big and small around the world, legacy publishers, born digital sites, and sort of everything in between. On our site, we do have a complete database of membership models in news and lifestyle media. And I do quickly want to share with you that, while some of the examples that I'll be sharing are more public interest news coverage, many of the principles that we have identified in our work studying news organizations and their membership around the world absolutely apply to magazines and commercial enterprises as well. And please, as Elizabeth mentioned, do add questions and comments in the chat, and I'll make sure that we leave some time for dialogue. One thing that I want to establish right off the bat is how we distinguish between subscription, membership, and donation, because these are terms that we very often find are conflated. They're used interchangeably, and we hope to bring more of a shared industry definition. And we think of donation primarily as a charitable exchange, We think of subscription as a product-based exchange. So this would apply in the case of New York Magazine or the New Yorker. I pay them an annual rate. They give me access to their site and a copy of their print magazine in my mailbox each week. That's where the exchange sort of begins and ends. It is a product transaction. And that is fantastic. And for many organizations, that is a great path forward as they look to sustainability. Where our project is particularly fascinated is around membership. What does it look like for your individual readers, viewers, and listeners to participate in your magazine or in your publication, more like being affiliated with a cause that they believe in? So something that can look more like affiliating themselves with a nonprofit organization, a political party, any sort of way that they might want to connect their own efforts, their time, their energy, their money, and their ideas with what you're doing, that they want to align themselves with that and push the work forward. And part of that work actually can be advocating for the news brand on your behalf. That's something that we'll make sure to have time to talk about later. And another component when we think about membership, because this question very often comes up, is what is the role of a paywall within subscription and membership? In its most robust form, we think of membership as an option to pay to participate. That can also look like a soft paywall, or like Slate Plus, the opportunity to be able to unlock some types of extras, whether it's early access to live event tickets, podcast specials, additional content, but that keeps the core news product free. And I would say the bulk of the organizations that we study that meet the definition of membership, as our project director, Jay Rosen, describes it, are those that are mostly open. The access to the core news product is free to most people who would want to make use of it. So that looks something like a public radio model, in which people opt in to pay, but their neighbors can still benefit from the coverage and can still access it, whether they pay or not. And at the core of this work, we really think about the social contract between sites and their members. What is given and received on both sides, and how do we make it such that our members feel like they're getting the better end of the deal? As part of this work, we very often think about habituation and loyalty from the perspective of how can our sites and our stations be more loyal to the members we serve with our work. And I also, before I get into our research findings, I should introduce myself. I realized that I didn't give too much of a background into my own work. I am a former arts and culture reporter. I was working most recently at the New York Times in the Audience Insights group, so conducting mainly qualitative research with the heads of news and feature desks there, where we looked a lot at what are individuals' patterns and propensities to pay, to really look at engagement in the long term, and also knowing that, yes, there are moments where people pause their subscription or discontinue giving to you. We really want to understand why people cancel as well. Why do people stop giving? Why do they stop contributing? And what are ways to bring them back? And that often is a piece of this work that is not very much talked about. But I think going back to study people who, who have fallen off, to understand what broke in that social contract is really important. Also, I think it's highly empathetic from the perspective that it recognizes that people have life circumstances that necessitate them making a change with you, and you want to create every opportunity for them to be able to come back as they're able to. The sources of our current research at the Membership Puzzle Project, where I have been working with Jay Rosen and our team of researchers from around the world now for a year, is that we conduct a lot of research into both lifestyle media and sort of hard news sites to understand whose job is it within the organization to care about what members value. We talk to members themselves. That's the bulk of the work that I'm going to take you through today. And then we also look at analogous spaces, so spaces outside of news that we think are well positioned to teach our industry what it looks like to foster long-term feelings of commitment and belonging. This is a quick glance at some of the other spaces that we've been studying, and there's more information on our site, membershippuzzle.org. But the thing that I want to share with you most today is recent research that we have conducted, qualitative research with about 200 supporters of independent news. And these range from members of the Texas Tribune in Austin to members of Day Correspondent, which is our member newsroom based out of Amsterdam, and which I think of as almost patient zero for membership in news. I'll be describing a few examples where Day Correspondent has very robust membership practices, but I will quickly say that something that that differentiates that site from many of its competitors is that individual reporters have great license to pursue beats of interest to them. So they have a lot of autonomy, but they are expected to spend anywhere from a third to half of their reporting time in close touch with their readers, and particularly readers who have personal experience and professional expertise to bear that can add to their reporting. So I think of Day Correspondent on one extreme, whereby members are contributing a great deal, not just 70 euros a month of flat membership fee, but also contributing their ideas and their expertise. Many of the sites that we advise are not quite at that extreme, but they are thinking more and more about what does it look like to really foster belonging within my organization, starting with my most loyal readers, that 1 to 10% of people who have the most that they want to contribute to the work that we do, and with the idea that studying those extreme users can have virtuous effects on the rest of the coverage. We share work like this with many for-profit institutions, BuzzFeed News, Wall Street Journal, etc. And so while some of the work that I'm going to take you through today is based on sites in the public interest, there certainly are larger findings. And many of the sites that we study have anywhere from between 4 to 6 revenue streams. So that can look like a combination of member funding, advertising, foundation funding, book, TV, movie sales, live event tickets or festivals. But we follow the News Revenue Hub's recommendation there around about 5 different sources of funding. That is enough such that none of these sites are dependent on one revenue stream, but that they also don't have so many revenue streams that their team loses focus. The way that we gather the work that I'll be sharing with you is that we bring editorial design and development teams together with supporters of their journalism, and we meet in person. And the discussion guide for these conversations, which often run about 90 minutes, is freely available to you all. You can take it from our site. And we look at things like, what are your points of frustration with news and media coverage as you access it now? What can this site be doing better for you? And if you were to design this membership program or to tweak it in some way, how could it better meet your own needs? So really taking a human-centered design approach to thinking about how we might meet members where they're at. I'm going to share with you 6 different themes that have come across in this research around the world, and then we'll welcome thoughts and questions that you have. So the very first thing that we hear in the course of this dialogue is a lot of frustration. We hear that supporters are highly dissatisfied with coverage that feels sort of run-of-the-mill. It can feel like commodity journalism. And what they tell us they're looking for is sites and stations that do fewer things, but do those things exceptionally well. So sites that have made distinct and sometimes painful decisions about what not to cover so that they can really double down in their areas of expertise. We hear a great deal here about the idea of depth and integrity. And that suggests to me that people are hungry for the type of transparency and the type of signaling that suggests you're worth their time, their money, and their trust. One example of this from the news space, ProPublica has done some amazing work in recent years, especially around not just bringing in their individual readers' ideas and often having them serve as story sources where relevant, but then also in reporting back, this is what we learned from you, our readers. So I think that idea of sort of closing the loop, that it's not just asking for what readers might be able to bring to bear, but then also recognizing them in the final produced work as well. One example where we also see organizations being highly transparent and it really working for them is the Voice of San Diego, an independent site in Southern California. And on their About Us page, they actually go so far as to say, these are the things that we seek. We seek a clean environment, a healthy ecosystem. And some people would argue, well, that's not exactly objective. More and more, we hear supporters of independent news saying, I want you to be transparent about what you stand for, and I want you to have a point of view. And that goes for hard news and lifestyle media alike. Some of the things that stand out in the sites that individual supporters choose to back is that they keep their focus. And so that means in some cases making hard calls and also being really clear about what is and is not included in their coverage or in their news report, and where possible actually signaling, there are other places that are doing this work well, we would point you to them. One example of this, Day Correspondent, our partner newsroom in the Netherlands, about 2 years ago, there were Belgian train station bombings, actually not very far from the site's Amsterdam offices, relatively. And on that day, the Day Correspondent ran nothing on their site. They sent one email newsletter dispatch to their readers and said, we have nothing to add today as this news is breaking. We encourage you to look to these individual sites that whose coverage we trust. We will come back to you in 100 days if in fact we have something to add to this story. If we have some substantive analysis that moves the story forward and can suggest why this happened and what it means and what you and your leaders should do about it. That ended up being their single largest day of new member growth, simply by saying, we choose to point you in the direction of people who are providing excellent coverage on this topic. We are not trying to chase the daily headlines. That is simply not our role. We want to offer a more systemic look at what's happening, and that takes time. In the act of sending that email newsletter, I think they did a great service, which is to point out that this coverage takes a great deal of energy. It's a huge investment, and it takes them away from other stories that they're trying to follow. I think opportunities that you have to actually bring people in, to let them see how the business of news gets done, are fantastically impactful. In the course of this research work, I've been surprised and somewhat disappointed to find that very often long-time subscribers, members, and donors, even very well-educated professionals, cannot tell you anything about the financial health of the organizations they support. And I think we can be less opaque about how we're doing, especially when we then are asking people to help back the work that we produce. One other piece around this is in talking with the 200 people who I'm referencing in this research, most could not name more than one or two people behind the news brands they trust. And that suggests we have a great way to go when it comes to familiarizing ourselves as human beings with them. The second thing that we heard in the course of this work is the importance of finding ways that people can participate and can contribute what they know. The Ferret is a daily investigative news site in Scotland, and they used to host in-person events within their newsroom, opportunities to meet their staff, and these ended up being not very well attended. And so the editor said, you know, let's actually flip the premise. Let's have our reporters teach investigative reporting techniques. Let's have them teach what they know. And those sessions quickly became oversold, basically by being able to give people insight into how the work gets done, and put that out on the table. It has a really fantastic effect on ensuring long-term loyalty. That event series has now become a regular Sunday fact-checking night. And I recognize this is a very small publication. What this looks like for international magazine media may be different. But that simple act of opening your doors can become really powerful. Another example here, Honolulu Civil Beat, which is a daily news site in Hawaii, opens up their editorial pitch meeting once a month to members. It's basically an opportunity for them to come, sit in, have a cup of coffee, meet the reporters, and basically hear how our stories pitched. How does Honolulu Civil Beat decide what runs? And then the second half of that meeting is an opportunity for editorial staff to hear directly from their members about what's front of mind for them. So it has sort of a really positive effect when we think back on that social contract. How do people on both sides give and receive what they need? For some smaller sites that we study, that can look like moderation or training into comment moderation. That can look like people committing code or graphic design or audio or video production, SEO support, legal guidance, all kinds of opportunities that people can actually contribute what they know, their professional skills, to the publication. In the interest of time, I'm going to actually skip this example, but the slides will be available to you. The third thing that we hear is the idea of be human, be real with me. We very often hear supporters tell us that they want to know how stories are created. They want to know how people can contribute their own experience, their own expertise. And they also want to know, where is it that individual reporters are coming from? What is their background? What is their commitment to reporting on this topic? And I think this suggests a great opportunity to make better use of staff pages, which on our sites very often can be just a link to follow someone on social media and then a data dump of their past articles. And I would suggest that actually that page is really fertile ground to be able to humanize the work, to explain not just someone's bio, but why they chose to come and work at your publication, why they're compelled by this work, and what they hope to see, advancements that they're eager for in their space. One example, Outside Magazine in a recent print issue had a by the numbers, almost, I think of this as a recipe card, sort of a neat example of, oh, like this is everything that went into this issue. And I personally am really curious to see more examples and more innovation around, let us break down for you what actually went into this coverage, because most people do not have really any insight or any literacy into how our issues are produced, into how we actually work with a group of people around the world to produce what we put in front of them. And so opportunities like this to basically demystify the work, to pull back the curtain, I think are really fascinating, and a place where we are very eagerly watching for what other designers might bring. Day Correspondent, which I had referenced earlier, does a great job of this also with showing how its members' money is spent. And in more recent iterations of this idea, they actually will show down to the euro cent, here's exactly how we spent your money last year. So it's taking this idea out of like a very dry membership report or annual report and actually putting it in an article page. I don't have an example of it here, but recently Mother Jones has done a great job of this, of alongside some private prisons reporting, basically in-depth investigative journalism that it ran. Clara Jeffrey, their editor-in-chief, on the same day ran a 10,000 word piece, which is how we actually did this work and what it cost, along with a call for people to subscribe, for people to become paying supporters of Mother Jones's work. And that idea that the story behind the story can be just as interesting, and also can be really illustrative about why we're asking for revenue from supporters in the first place. Another example, Slate Plus, I think, did a great job with just explaining online advertising revenues don't fully cover our costs. We don't have print subscribers to keep us afloat. We need your help. I think just the very conversational tone here goes a long way. Another sort of similar example, Daily Maverick is a daily investigative site out of Cape Town, South Africa. And I love the idea here, which is we're actually going to put out front like what is expected on both sides. So if you choose to financially back our work, this is what you can expect from us. And it goes so far as to explain, we won't waste your time. We value your attention. And I think in the cultural moment that we're in now, where people very often will complain to us, I'm sick of pop-up ads and slow to load pages and sponsored content links that have nothing to do with the stories that they run under. I simply want to do what I came to your site to do, whether that's let me meet other members, let me make sense of a complex story, or let me pay you. We very often hear the idea of a return to calm, a return to simplicity as what more members say that they want. And that can go as far as having a very simple and straightforward subscription or membership pitch without a lot of tiers. Sometimes we see these charts, which are 7 different membership tiers and what kind of benefits you can unlock at every level. And I would very much argue that being really simple and straightforward about what membership or subscription means, what it costs, and why you're charging that amount go a long way. The next thing that we hear is a call for humility. Just as people are interested in depth and integrity, they also want for the people behind the sites and the publications that they support to correct themselves when they're wrong, to acknowledge that they are not omniscient narrators, that they're not the source of all knowledge, but that they do, of course, have gaps in their reporting, and that they're eager to fill those gaps with their readers and with other people who can offer relevant expertise. There's a site called WTF Just Happened Today. It's a Trump News Today site by Matt Keiser, who formerly worked at Business Insider and Fortune. And he has done a sort of amazing thing as a one-man band, as it were, which is that he is almost completely member-funded. And he shows very transparently what it costs for him to run the site, along with a call, including what his proposed salary is, for members to help pay him to do this work as a full-time job. He includes things like his MailChimp, Squarespace, and Rackspace charges. He really lays a very transparent financial picture out for his members. And that has not only allowed him to fundraise enough for himself, but now to also bring on some part-time staff. And the example that you see here is just a portrait of how human he is in his communications. So at the very beginning, he says, there were a lot of errors in yesterday's newsletter. I want to thank our grammar police mafia, basically readers who had called out to him when there were when there were typos. And it's all in a good spirit, which is we want to make this a better publication. We want to make this a community with high standards. Another example, and this is again from Day Correspondent, is that their individual reporters, who I mentioned at the top of the call, have quite a bit of autonomy in choosing the subjects that they cover, also are required to publish a weekly newsletter dispatch that is directly from them. So it has a very human face. It has this hand-drawn avatar. And it's not just an opportunity for them to publish their latest work. And it also can be a chance to say, this is what I'm reading, this is what I'm thinking about, what else should be on my radar, or who else should I talk to? And those individual sort of, you could think of them at the beat level, those individual beat reporter newsletters maybe don't have email subscription lists in the tens of thousands, but the people who end up subscribing have very, very highly relevant expertise. And so it becomes a really wonderful pool of people to bounce ideas off of, to ask for suggested reading, etc. Just two more things here. We hear a lot about the importance of a calming user experience. And this is really the idea of, let me do what I came to your site to do, that I mentioned. I often find that user experience design can frankly be an afterthought, especially for newspaper sites or for legacy publications that are using software or content management systems that frankly at very face value can look quite dated. And members notice. People really do make a distinction between sites that make good use of their attention and those that feel like they're built on hack together technologies. I'm happy to talk about this idea further, but I have been really struck by how often individual readers have said to us, you know, it really does matter to me that sites, apps, any physical publications, really that the design is as well thought through as the text, is as well thought through as any of the marketing communications. So I think of this almost as production value parity, such that it really feels like a streamlined experience, and that any request for subscribers or members is as well thought through as copy in the rest of the coverage that they're seeing. I'm sure that we've all been, listening to a public radio when a pledge drive comes on, and all of a sudden it doesn't sound like the anchors who you're used to hearing. And so I think that idea that we need to put the same care and craft into any of our revenue communications, into any of our audience development efforts that we do with the rest of the editorial product is hugely important. I mentioned earlier that also the importance of knowing what you shouldn't do. Preeti, who's a member of Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting, shared, when I listen to or read your work, it feels like talking to my friend who knows what's happening in current events, but says to me, there's one issue we really have to talk about. I really want to talk through this one thing. Here's what you need to know. Here's why this topic matters. And that idea of having some discretion, having some curation goes a very long way with making good use of all of your readers' time. Finally, in the sites that we study, we hear a lot about the importance of signaling that you're working in the public interest, particularly when it comes to opportunities to keep access to the core news product free, which I'm happy to discuss further. But we hear a great deal that, if you are making regular pitches to people, explaining why it is that you're undertaking that getting their financial contribution, getting the contribution of what they might add to the news report and what they might contribute to the coverage itself, and really signaling that consistently and in a human voice feels in sharp contrast to many of the ways that they feel other social contracts are broken, whether it's with social media platforms, banking institutions, governments. We hear a lot this idea that something is broken, and membership is one way to begin to restore that human element in journalism and in lifestyle media. We have written more about this on our site, and I welcome you to review it and to reach out to us with questions. There's one more piece that I wanted to share with you before opening up to discussion, which is in the course of this qualitative research, we do an exercise with supporters, which is to understand what are the things that they value most in the organizations that they support financially and with other contributions. And there's very high consistency in the things that they tell us they care about. So from left to right, offering the world something I think should exist. So this is sort of the extrinsic motivation. This is the idea that even if I don't actually read the coverage on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis, I still believe that there's something in it that is really important, that the world is a better place because this work exists, and I want to help continue that legacy. The next piece is around appropriate asks. So this could be financial. This is the idea that it's really important to do more rigorous cost analysis than just benchmarking yourself to what Netflix or Spotify charge, which I would argue is faulty math. It's a completely different economy of scale, but really doing deep work to understand exactly what you'll need and with how many paying subscribers or members to deepen your reporting. And then also, in the case of non-financial asks, what are opportunities that people might contribute that are not just educational and interesting for them, but that also actually help staff, that aren't just volunteering for the sake of it or to say that you checked a box, but that really do end up benefiting the journalism as well. We talked about the third bit, which is transparency, including in hiring decisions. So why you actually chose to bring someone on, what you were seeking in that candidate, basically bringing people along your process and your decision-making in a more visible way. Brand design and visual appeal, which I mentioned, cannot be an afterthought. It's hugely important in all of the places that we live and work online. And then finally, this is the sort of intrinsic component on the right, a sense of uniqueness, a sense of supporting coverage that doesn't just feel like it's chasing the headlines of the day, but that has something really unique and valuable to add to the conversation. Finally, we hear very high cross-cultural consistency in the things that people say they value less in news brands that they choose to support, and less than you might expect. So the first is branded merchandise. It can be very time-consuming for staff to fulfill if it's ceramic mugs or something that's heavy to ship or costly. I very often find that we did not choose to go into this business to be in the tote bag delivery game. And so better connecting where individual donors or members' money is going with the core news report, with the value that they're providing, really is a better use of your money. 9 times out of 10, our survey respondents will say they would rather have the money go back into the coverage than into a branded t-shirt. And of course, you will have people who are really proud to be affiliated with you, and a branded t-shirt actually is something that should exist for them. What I would argue for there is actually opening a store on your site. And it can be a really simple page with a few different options that people can choose to buy, especially as gifts, but where you see a higher return on the cost of that item. And then lastly, a sense of exclusivity. So when we ask supporters of independent coverage, how important is it to you that these communities, these member groups, be walled gardens, be basically closed communities? We hear usually not at all. I would rather have access to the core news product be free so that more people can access it. So I can discuss the work with more of my friends, students, colleagues, even if that means I'm underwriting the coverage and they can access it and don't have to pay for it. And so here we get into some questions around hard and soft paywalls that I'm happy to talk through more. Another just brief example, and I think on this last point about paywalls, The Guardian does this quite persistently, where it will say, we haven't put up a paywall. For our work to remain open, we need your help. And what you see direct above that call to action actually is a project that they undertook, which is coverage lines reporting. This was a new endeavor for them around public lands reporting. And they basically said, we have a massive reporting endeavor we want to undertake. We won't be able to do it unless we get direct reader contributions to bring this reporting to life. Here's what we would need to fundraise. By being so clear, they actually were able to beat their goal within 31 hours and then had a stretch goal at the same amount, which they quickly achieved. By being able to so clearly say, this is exactly where it is that your money is going. Just briefly, we have more work to do in the second year of the Membership Puzzle Project. One of the things that we really want to understand is financial inclusion and equity, particularly in situations where individual readers are not able to pay to subscribe or to join. And so here we look a lot at student subscriptions, opportunities to underwrite someone else's membership. And we have a great deal of work to do also to understand which qualitative inputs and quantitative data membership-minded organizations are best poised to pay attention to. So really, what impact measurement do you take most to heart? With that, I am going to go ahead and open up the lines so that we can hear questions and ideas that people have.
Emily, this is Elizabeth. What process do you use to work with some of your partner companies to kind of get at either what they are currently doing successfully or what they may be doing to make them more successful? What's the process, the discovery process?
Sure, it's a great question. So I will use an example, which is 538, which is a spun out of the New York Times, run by Nate Silver, and it's a politics and sports forecasting site. And we have begun to talk to them about basically doing an audit of what their longtime readers value and what they want. And so the course of a project like that, and we operate completely in the public interest. And so thanks to our grant-funded nature, we're able to advise sites large and small completely for free. And what we do with them is sort of an internal audit of who are all the people within your organization who are member-facing. In what ways, if any, does communication break down? What are best practices? What have wins looked like? What changes have you made as a result of that feedback? And then very often we will host conversations between staff and readers directly. Sometimes a recommendation that comes out of that work is that you might put together a reader panel, basically a set group of people with a shared interest and commitment to your work who provide feedback as requested. And this becomes a really interesting idea. And we've seen reader panels that are as few as 10 people and as many as 500. So in cases on the larger side, Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting has about a 500-person reader panel email list. And they'll reach out to them with very clear requests for involvement. So that would be things like, we're tone testing a new newsletter. Can you review the copy below and give us your feedback by tomorrow at noon? And very regularly, they'll get responses to the tune of 30% of their 500-person reader panel. And so that becomes an amazing way to sort of gut check before they go live, let's say, with a new editorial product or a substantive change. They're not emailing them to review copy each week, but it is really when there is some forthcoming improvement or innovation to come. Sometimes we will work closely with teams that are thinking about churn, because it's a very important consideration here, not just how do I attract new members, but how do I keep my existing members. We do not do much financial consulting as far as what individual sites and publications should charge. But there are firms, Mather Economics is one of them, there are many others, that really their bread and butter is what you should ask people to pay and why. And we very often will refer people to those types of firms or consultants so that they get the numbers right, because it's a huge part of this work that we're talking about. Other questions or ideas?
Do you see this as being more effective in certain areas of content than others?
You know, it's a really interesting question, and one that we're very frequently asked. I think that born digital sites certainly have a leg up in that their time to publish is so much more rapid. But I think the single biggest success criteria or factor that we see in studying sites around the world is if publishers, if people on the masthead, people at the top, demonstrate that they have a real capacity to care about what subscribers and members value, that single factor almost matters more than where they operate, the size of their paying reader base, etc. And the reason is that it has a really positive, almost a trickle-down effect on staff, which is not just, oh, that's the domain of the marketing department or the development department. But actually, no, it's my job as an individual reporter, it's my job as an individual designer to care about knowing how we make our money and to being in touch with consumers of our work in person as much as possible. And this is where opportunities for live events, festivals, and the like are a really great opportunity to collect this type of feedback in person. I would have thought that a year into this project, we would be able to say like X, Y, and Z factors are the single, like those are the most important things. If you can just be like publication X, then you have a winning formula. In fact, we see there are so many different variables that it's not quite, the calculus is more complicated, but the importance of leadership, and we see this actually work really well. An example from the podcast world is Radiotopia, a podcast network that is run by, or I guess jointly run by Roman Mars. And he is highly creative in working with their marketing department about thinking through what are ways that individual listeners factor into their reporting. If they do any giveaways, any sort of like member swag, it is very closely tied actually to stories that they've reported. So the idea is that there is a really wide and very wide, both wide and specific way to connect with their readers. And he basically signals to his staff that it's everyone's job to be concerned about what their listeners care about. And I think that has sort of an outsized positive effect on how staff spend their time. The other interesting thing with the Radiotopia example, the shorthand for their members is beautiful nerds, beautiful new nerds everywhere. And the idea that it's sort of a term of endearment. We very often see sites not use the term member at all. We've studied some sites in Latin America that call their members super amigos. We've seen sort of every variation under the sun. And I would say use the language that works best for you. If there is some sort of naming convention that really works, that's not member, but that speaks to robust and inclusive ways that people can contribute to your organization, I think by all means designing that with your members is a really wonderful way to design a program that's going to be a bit closer to their hearts and to their wallets.
Emily, thank you for your presentation and for sharing your information. You talked about amigos and nerds. Is there any evidence that bringing these curated audiences together in events helps with the membership puzzle?
Absolutely. And actually, it's one of the opportunities that we here can drive and can help with the decision to sign up for recurring years or to become an annual member. That opportunity to, and it's not just meet members like me. It goes actually further than that. It's the idea of meet members who share something that I value, even if we disagree, even if actually we have different political viewpoints, we come from different places. The idea that we have a shared interest in seeing a publication like this exist and flourish is really hugely important. I'm going to paste a link in the chat to a book. It's a guide to audience revenue and engagement that we published with the Tao Center at Columbia last year, and it has a quite detailed portion on events that I would definitely point you to. There is another book that is recently published by a woman named Priya Parker, and it's called The Art of Gathering, and it's a really beautiful book around how to very thoughtfully gather humans for a shared purpose. And one of the neat things that she shares in that work is actually that closed door gathering. So meetings of members in which you give them some decision-making capacity, not just to pay lip service to that, but places where you really do want your members' input can be an amazing opportunity to foster their commitment to the work that you do. I'm going to quickly just get that link for you, and thank you for the question. I did not mention too much about events, so I really appreciate you mentioning that bit, because opportunities to gather, ideally in person, but also online around a particular theme, I think can be really impactful. I'm also going to just drop in the chat how you can contact us, because we're always interested to hear ideas and questions that you have, or any research questions that we might address on your behalf in our ongoing research.
It's all like imaginary, right? Move up your body to your side.
Emily, I just wanted to say thank you very much on behalf of MPA. This is the kind of thinking that we really appreciate, and I think kind of taking a different lens to the art of bringing together communities, which is what so many of our media members do day in and day out and do so well across platforms and experiences. So it's given us some new ideas about how to think about them, and I think also an increasingly substantiated perspective on how ready they are to embrace your brand in new ways. So that's super important, and we appreciate it. If anybody has any questions for Emily, please contact her directly. We are very desirous of continuing this dialogue at MPA, so please let me know if you like to do more gatherings like this among our members. And I'll just leave a moment for any final questions or thoughts from our audience, and then I think we're ready to sign off.
Let them roll. Great. Why are they ripping? Yeah.
And Elizabeth, I would just mention as one last point to follow on what you shared, it really is fantastic, and I have a really lucky purview in this space, which is getting to hear from supporters directly about the impact that this work has on them, that you and your staff are doing at publications around the world, to really not just enrich their lives, not just inform them, but actually really make them active supporters in democracy. And they recognize the work, and the way that they talk about it is just so clear and so reflective of the importance of the work. And so from those users on to you, I share their thanks and their gratitude for the important work that you're doing.
I didn't realize that.
Thank you.
I do now. But
We wish everyone a great day. Keep in touch. Stay cool if you're in the New York area, and best of luck to all of you in your endeavor.
core, that would
Good.
Thank you.
like elongate your core, your side bodies.
Yeah, I mean, all of it.